all 10 FBS conferences are playing this fall. The NCAA considers waiving record requirements for bowls, and I preview each of the college pick'em matchups for this weekend. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
There's a personal foul on number 99 of the defense. After he tackled the quarterback, he's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and yes, this is After Further Review. Thanks so much for tuning in, whether it's in the podcast form or on Facebook. Appreciate you tuning in as always. Top story for today's show is obviously the announcement that all 10 FBS conferences are now going to be playing in some format this fall. A couple of announcements from the Pac-12 and the MAC, along with the Mountain West. These announcements came Thursday evening, and it was very interesting to watch the reaction in real time from these announcements because, there was a lot made of the Big Ten and what their decision was going to be and how that was going to play out, and there was a lot of drama surrounding their decision. You didn't really see that with these conferences. Obviously, the Mountain West and the MAC are not in the Power 5 and not going to make any noise in terms of the playoff or any big bowl games. So minor announcements there, and then the Pac-12, and this one sort of surprised me because the Pac-12 is a Power 5 conference. Obviously, they haven't competed in the playoff in several years, and it's been a while since we've had several teams from the Pac-12 string together a consistent couple of seasons of national relevance. I mean, obviously Stanford's been able to do it, Oregon's been able to do it, Washington had a little spurt, USC, but right now there's not really anybody from the Pac-12 that's going to be able to compete with either an ACC champion Clemson or an SEC champion or a Big Ten a champion like Ohio State. There's just nobody really in the Pac-12 right now that's in that discussion. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to see it, did it actually make a noise? Like, it just was very under the radar. Not something that got a lot of traction. And it's going to be really interesting to see. Now, obviously, starting with the Mid-American Conference, the MAC, they have announced that they're going to begin their football season on November 4th. And they're going to play a 6-game conference-only schedule with a championship game on December 18th or 19th. So the big takeaway here is we're going to have fall football. We're going to have fall football across the board. And this even applies to the Pac-12, which we're going to get into in a second. But I want to go through these Group of 5 conferences first. But the full schedule for the MAC is going to be released later. And interestingly, sources from the conference have confirmed that they're going to play some games on weeknights through the first few weeks of November, and then they're going to move to Saturdays in December. So I think, look, obviously the MAC is not going to draw a huge number of eyeballs, but the fact is that playing on a weeknight, probably an uncontested weeknight, right? You got Saturday night football, Sunday night football, Monday night football, Thursday night football, which usually, obviously, there's NFL games on Thursday night, and then sometimes the ACC will throw a few games on a Thursday. So maybe we'll see a Tuesday night game. Maybe we'll see a Wednesday night game. I don't know, but I would really interested to know when the last time there has been a Wednesday night regular season game, because I don't recall that being standard for any conference, Power 5 or Group of 5. But that'll be interesting. And then obviously they're going to move to the more traditional Saturday slot in December. So, obviously an announcement that I think I didn't really see coming. I didn't think the Pac-12 was in any position to get this together as quickly as they did. So interesting in terms of, the reversal, because I think actually on the previous show or last week, we talked about how there was a lot of regulation in place that was preventing, contact practice and a number of things for Pac-12 schools, specifically in Oregon and California. But seems to be they've cut through the red tape. So, obviously all the commissioners have come out and said, look, we're going to be diligent in monitoring the health environment. It's obviously a fluid situation. But, still, it calls for a celebration for sure. So looking at the Mountain West, they have announced that they're going to play an 8-game football season starting on the weekend of October 24th. So a little bit before the MAC decides to start back up. But league presidents met Thursday and they voted to start the fall season, which they had originally postponed on August 10th. And their conference championship game, the Mountain West Conference Championship game, is going to be held on December 19th, which is a day before the college football playoff selections. Now, again, nobody from the Mountain West or the MAC is going to be in the college football playoff discussion, obviously. But what's really interesting, and it's something that I'll have to, unpack a little bit, but, all of these conferences are playing and they're finishing before that selection day. And it's almost like that was the imaginary cutoff, right? Because originally there was a lot of talk about the Pac-12 playing in the spring. And I think, if they had done that and carried that through, there would have been a perception that the Pac-12 was now almost no longer part of the traditional college football makeup, and especially the Power 5 conferences, right? Like that would have definitely isolated not only the Pac-12, but any other conference that decides to go that route. Power 5, Group of 5, whoever. Ivy League. So it's very interesting to see that a lot of these conferences are basically saying, listen, we would rather play basically half the schedule that we normally play before, we play in the spring. So there's something there in terms of trying to get your season in and your conference championship game in before the college football playoff selection day. Interesting to note, though, for the Mountain West is that the title game is going to be held on the campus of the team with the highest winning percentage, and I don't know if they have officially decided, but I think they're going to stick with their divisions. But they are still discussing using a non-division format and just putting the top 2 teams in the contest. As far as I know, that decision has not been made by the Mountain West, although their commissioner, Craig Thompson, did say that they will figure that out in the near future. And again, a lot of these conferences, I know the Pac-12 has said that there's not going to be any fans in attendance at all for these games. That doesn't surprise me, especially with the continuing lockdowns in that part of the country. Obviously, it's all a state and local basis decision, and if those states haven't opened up, then there's not going to be fans in the stands. But I did see that earlier today that Rob DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has basically said that Florida's reopened completely. I think they're in their stage 3 of reopening, and that any further lockdown would have to be justified. Any further state or any further local lockdown would have to be justified with the state. So interesting, but again, obviously there's going to be some protocols in place. The Mountain West has announced that all players, coaches, trainers, and on-field personnel are going to have to be tested 3 times a week, and obviously there's going to be contact tracing for people who test positive. And the league is going to cover all the testing costs with its reserve funds. Now, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 have also committed to league-wide rapid testing during the fall. But these conferences, the Big Ten and the Pac-12, are going to be doing daily testing. So definitely interesting to see how the 2 Power 5 conferences that were obviously skittish about playing this fall actually canceled their seasons, or postponed them, I should say. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 are going to do daily testing. You don't see it quite that frequent in the SEC, which I believe is 2 or 3 times a week. And then the ACC or the Big 12. But this is, I think a really great thing. I mean, obviously, if you can hold the events in a safe way and you can test and make sure that everybody does not have coronavirus, then you can hold the events. Should go for it. So it's going to be a huge it's a huge mood swing, right? Because everybody over there in that area of the country was pretty much, all right, we're not going to have football. There's no way we're going to have football. And now that they have made this announcement, again, very under the radar. I mean, this announcement was made last night by all these conferences, and there's really not been much said about it. But most of these conferences, the Mountain West, the MAC, and the Pac-12 are going to immediately transition to that 20 hours of practice a week, and begin that preseason fall camp practice regimen. And then as far as I know, the NCAA has recommended 6 weeks of ramp-up time before the season. That was what their oversight committee was recommending to these conferences. So, conferences like the Mountain West are going to have that same 29-day practice period between Friday, which is today, and October 24th, which is when their season starts. So, again, this is by the skin of their teeth, and it's really been interesting to watch how these conferences are willingly cutting out, games so that they can finish their conference championship before the college football playoff selection day. Now, the Pac-12, I believe, in terms of the number of games that they're going to be playing, the Pac-12, I think, is going to have 7 games. They're going to have a 7-game schedule. And their season is going to start on November 6th. Again, they held a vote and reversed their decision to postpone their season, which they made in early August. And it actually, reading here further, they postponed all sports until at least January 1st, and that has been reversed. So this is a ruling that applies not only to football but also any other fall sports that were supposed to take place. Interesting quote here from Larry Scott, the commissioner of the Pac-12. He said, and this is a direct quote, "This has been the result of what we said back in August, that we'd follow the science, follow the data, follow the advice from our medical experts." And then he went on to say, and that we know how badly our student athletes want to compete as student athletes for the Pac-12, but that we would only do so when we felt they could do so safely. Now, there's numbers that I've seen from the CDC recently from yesterday is that right now the survivability rate of COVID for people aged under 19 is 99.997, and the survivability rate for individuals aged 20 to, I think it was 35, is like 99.6 or something along those lines. And again, with the testing, with the rapid testing in place, and the contact tracing and the limited number of people that are actually going to be at the venues, clearly these conferences feel that they can keep a good handle on any cases that do, arise, and then they can take whatever steps they need to limit the spread. Pac-12 said that the men's and women's basketball teams can begin November 25th. So, interesting move here from the Pac-12. This is a complete 180. The Big Ten, I don't think, was this far. The Big Ten was more hesitant than the Pac-12, right? The Pac-12 said no sports until next year, at least. And the Big Ten was in that camp, but they weren't quite that far out there. And so it's really been interesting to see the Pac-12 just completely change course and do a complete 180. And there really not be a lot of coverage on it. I mean, there's very few people right now that are talking about this, and this really wasn't a major breaking story last night or earlier today. But as we dive into the Pac-12 schedule for this year, as it stands right now, every Pac-12 team is going to play the 5 opponents in their respective division, plus a divisional crossover game. So they are going to be keeping divisions. As of right now, the Pac-12 will still have their divisions. And that is going to lead them into a conference championship game scheduled for December 18th. Now, as the Big Ten has announced, the Pac-12 is going to allow teams that don't qualify for the title game, the conference championship game, they're going to be allowed to play an additional conference game against a team from the opposite division. So they really will have, you're going to play every team in your division, you're going to play one cross-division game, and then if you don't make it in the championship game, you get one more cross-division game. So every team's going to play 7 games. Teams in the conference championship, teams not in the conference championship. And it's interesting because, this is going to actually lead us into the second part of the show that we'll get to in a second. But this leads us into what will the bowl eligibility requirements look like? And what is the NCAA going to do about that? Because, look, obviously the Pac-12 is not going to be competing for a college football playoff spot, right? Like, we all know this. But what are they going to do with teams that have played 7 games? Are you going to require them to have won 3, 4, 5? I mean, what's the parameter for that? And looking at the college football playoff specifically for the Pac-12, obviously there has been no indication that they are going to be ineligible. But I don't expect the Pac-12 to have a team that's going to be able to be in that conversation. But it is important from a monetary standpoint. Okay, the Pac-12. Even if they don't have a team that's going to be included in that playoff, they need to be eligible to receive that payout. So there was a $66 million payout last season to each of the Power 5 conferences from the college football playoff. Okay, so that right there is huge. So the Pac-12, even if they're not even in the conversation, they need to make sure that they're eligible so that they are able to collect that payout at the end of the season. Now, I don't expect it to be $66 million this year, but it certainly will be something. And so they, need to make sure that that's something that they don't miss out on. And again, this is a conference that's already announced that no fans are going to be in attendance for this season. Now, the Pac-12 commissioner has said that they're going to revisit that decision of not allowing fans in January. So it makes me think that they obviously have reversed the decision on whether or not they're going to play. But they haven't decided on what they're going to do with attendance, and they're going to wait until that original mark of January 1st to go back and say, okay, what do we want to do in terms of fan attendance? And, how do we want to handle that? Because, again, back in August, the Pac-12, they voted unanimously to postpone the season until that January 1st mark. And in part of that decision, they explained that the reason for the postponement was, or part of the reason was that they needed daily rapid turnaround testing, which, at the time we didn't think was going to be available. However, less than a month later, that seems to be something that's feasible. They have reached an agreement with a company that's going to provide daily tests that have been approved by the FDA, and by early October, that's expected to be in place and to be in operation. So, look, I mean, I think you can make a lot out of this, and you can say, oh, well, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, they acted so prematurely, and they didn't give enough time and wait to see what sort of developments would come out. But I think this is more a testament to how quickly these pharmaceutical companies were able to turn around and supply these rapid tests, and they were able to get the protocols in place to make sure that people or the athletes or trainers or coaches or whoever are being tested and are being quarantined if they contract COVID. And I think it's a great testament to that and to the ingenuity and the resourcefulness of private industry. It's unfortunate that they're not going to allow fans, even if they are socially distanced. But again, right now, football is football. You can take you're going to take what you can get, especially if you're in the Pac-12 area of the country. And so, again, I think this is a really positive announcement that obviously came out last night to very little fanfare. You have to wonder how much pressure they felt from the ACC, the Big 12, and the SEC, because, again, the Big 10, the backlash was immediate, right? The backlash for their decision from players, from parents, even from coaches. Ryan Day at Ohio State, right? His statement, the backlash was pretty immediate, and I think there was a common belief in the Pac-12 that, after the Big Ten postponed their season, the other Power 5 conferences would kind of follow suit. They would go, it's the Big Ten, and this is a conference that's, known for priding themselves on academics and integrity, even though they've had some of the worst scandals in not just football related, but in college athletics and higher ed in general. A lot of Big Ten schools have had major issues, but regardless, they're still seen as a conference that has a higher standard, or supposedly has a higher standard. And so I think the perception from the Pac-12 was, once the Big Ten makes their decision, the ACC, they'll be easy to fold, and the Big 12, they'll probably go along with it. And the last lone survivor will be the SEC. That's what everybody expected. It's going to be the SEC as the last conference before eventually that card falls, and they decide that they're going to postpone the season. And that didn't happen. And the Big Ten faced a lot of pressure to change its course, and they did. And so the Pac-12 was left as being the only Power 5 conference not playing football. And again, it's not just that $66 million payout last season for the playoff. It's the perception. Okay, these schools in the Pac-12, the USC at one point was the best program in the country. Okay, Oregon, back in the early 2010s when they were going against, Chip Kelly, one of the best programs in the country. Even Stanford, when Andrew Luck was there. There have been moments of greatness from the Pac-12, and to completely separate yourself from the rest of the Power 5 conferences would destroy your reputation in terms of being a premier conference for college football, and they just weren't willing to do that. And importantly, there have been enough developments on the safety side of things for them to feel comfortable with going forward with the season. So again, this is a really interesting announcement. I wasn't expecting it. Honestly, I was not expecting the Pac-12 to reverse their course. I'm glad they did. And it's going to be really interesting to see what their schedule looks like and how ready these teams are. Because as far as I know, they haven't been allowing practice because of regulations. So it's going to be very interesting. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the second topic of today's show, which we mentioned a little bit earlier, and that is the NCAA, and they are considering waiving record requirements for bowls. A lot to discuss, a lot to unpack. That's next. Stick with us. Welcome back to the show. This is After Further Review. I'm Jay Smith. Appreciate you tuning in and talking some college football. We've already kind of gone over the announcement by the conferences, specifically the Pac-12, the MAC, and the Mountain West. They're returning to football this fall. All 10 FBS conferences are going to be playing football this fall at some point, obviously with varying starting dates. Now we got to talk about the bowl games. Okay, this is interesting. This came out yesterday. The Division I Football Oversight Committee for the NCAA has recommended that any FBS team playing football this season should be eligible to play in a bowl game, regardless of their record, as long as they meet academic progress rate requirements for postseason eligibility. So this idea has been floated around. The D1 Council for the NCAA still needs to approve this measure, and they are scheduled to meet and vote on this on October 13th and 14th. through the 13th and the 14th. So it's going to be a little while before we officially know if this is going to be the plan. But I have a gut feeling that this is what they're going to go with. This is what they're going to go with. They're going to completely do away with, you got to be 500. I mean, we've even seen some 5-7 teams, right? We've seen teams that aren't even at 500 getting into bowl games. But I think with everything going on this season and how uncertain it is and how there's so much in flux, right? You have all these different start dates, all these conferences are playing different number of games, and some are playing non-conference games and some are playing conference games only, that it just makes sense to just waive the requirement because of COVID. And, just give teams a more flexible framework for the postseason. It's going to be, I think, really the bowl season this year will feel like an extension of the regular season. And here's why I think that. The bowl season is always, right, it's always after a team has played 12 games. They've played 12 games. Maybe they've played in a conference championship. And now they're just hanging out into the season. Odds are they've traveled somewhere cool like the Bahamas Bowl or the Hawaii Bowl, and somewhere warm is where they're playing more often than not. And they're playing a bowl game, and they get some cool swag and they have a good time. It's basically like a week-long vacation. It's a week-long vacation. I was covering the Sugar Bowl my junior year when Clemson played Alabama in the semifinal. That was the year that Kelly Bryant was the starter and Clemson lost that game. I think it was like 26-6. It wasn't pretty. It was the only year in the last 4 years that Clemson hasn't made it to a title game. But anyway, it's a week-long vacation. I mean, it is for the whole team. It's a crazy experience, and I don't think you're going to see that this year for obvious reasons. But it's going to feel like a regular season game because a lot of these schools, let's look at the Pac-12, right? They've played 7 games. They'll have played 7 games, and they're going to come into the bowl season, and it's going to be their 8th game. It's not going to feel like, oh, this is our our 13th game, or this is our 14th game if you've played a conference championship. So it's not going to feel as removed from the regular season. And huge thing here, you have to remember that a lot of these conference championship games and a lot of these conferences that are playing with later start dates, there's not going to be a 2.5 week gap between bowl season and the end of the regular season, right? It's not going to happen. So you're going to have less than a 2-week turnaround, maybe even a week for some schools to get ready for a bowl game. Maybe they'll set a minimum of like 8 to 10 days before a team can obviously play in a bowl game. But you're not going to see the same kind of fanfare that you normally would see for a big bowl game like the Sugar Bowl or the Orange Bowl or the Rose Bowl. I mean, who even knows how they're going to do the Rose Parade this year? I mean, can't imagine there'll be people there. But anyway, it's going to feel like the regular season. So this idea of let's do away with record requirements, I'm in favor of this. I don't think it makes any sense or does any good to look at a team that's played 7 games and say, okay, you got to win 4. You got to win 4. You got to be 4-3 to go to bowl. I mean, why even bother at that point? Just let them play an extra game. Just let the kids play an extra game. Let them travel somewhere. Just let them play a game. They ain't gonna be anybody in the stands anyway. Just let them play another game. So this again, this idea that they're just gonna completely do away with record requirements is interesting, and you have to wonder whether or not the NCAA is going to revert back to the minimum of 500 against FBS opponents this year, or I'm sorry, next year and the following season, because this could set a new precedent, and I don't really have an issue with it. I believe, I have always said for years, there are too many bowl games that don't matter. The way to fix the bowl season marathon is, or the way to fix, there are so many bowl games that have really terrible teams playing in them. Teams that really, I mean, they're 6-6, right? And they went 500, but you watch these matchups, especially until, the second week of bowl season, and they're hard to watch. And it's really not a good product that they're putting on TV. I think the way to improve the bowl season is you reduce the number of games, and that means that, you almost have to win 8 games to get into a bowl, 8-4, right? That would significantly reduce the number of bowls, but all of the matchups are probably going to be closer, and they're going to be more interesting. It's going to be a better product for TV. Now, there's a lot of money in these bowl games, and so the odds of them just saying, oh, yeah, we're just going to cancel 15 bowl, I don't think that's going to happen. But either way, I think, with these conference-only schedules this year and the uneven amount of games, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do to remove the record requirement. I think that this vote should go through. I think it'll be passed. It'll be interesting to see, though. It'll be interesting to see, because if they decide to go a different route, I don't, what's your measuring stick? How do you even, there's no uniformity across college football right now. Not even start date, not number of games, not opponents. I mean, nobody's really playing non-conference except for I think the ACC is the Big 12, or is the Big 12 playing a non-conference game? I'd have to pull up their schedule to see. I know the ACC is allowing one non-conference game. The Big 12, the SEC is not. They have said that they are not going to allow non-conference games. It does not appear, looking at Oklahoma's schedule, Missouri State. Missouri State was a non-conference game for them. So it looks like the Big 12 is allowing one non-conference, which Oklahoma used on Missouri State. So, but anyway, this is a interesting decision, and idea that has come out yesterday. It'll be interesting to see if this is implemented or not. I think it's the right thing to do, but they'll make their decision on, I believe, October 13th through the 14th. Yep, that's when the council is set to meet. We're going to take one final break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap up the show, and we're going to preview each of the college pick'em matchups for this weekend. If you are not in the AFR college pick'em group, you should be, because we're going to preview those games. That's next. Welcome back to the show, final segment of today's AFR. Previewing each of the college pick'em matchups for this weekend in our college pick'em group. Again, if you are not in the AFR college pick'em group, what are you doing? You should be in the group. It's not that hard. All you got to do is sign up. Use the link that's going to be posted on our social media and sign up. Pick your games for that week. Put in the tiebreaker, what your score you think will be for the tiebreak game, which I believe this week is Tennessee and South Carolina. You submit your picks, and then you get to see where you are on the leaderboard against everybody else in the AFR College Pick'em group. Again, that link will be posted again on our social media sometime this evening is probably when I'm going to post it. But be sure to get in there if you haven't already. All right, let's start off with the first matchup that we're going to be looking at. This one is Kentucky against Auburn. Kentucky against Auburn, a intriguing matchup in the SEC. Let me just say this. Obviously, Bo Nix at Auburn, a quarterback that I'm pretty high on. I'm high on the Tigers. I think Auburn's going to have a great year. This is a guy that set freshman records for passing yards and touchdown passes as freshman records, right? He had 2,542 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, which is really impressive considering the caliber of opponents that he was playing, right? The Florida, the Georgia, LSU, Alabama. I think, Gus Malzahn has proven that he can develop talent in Auburn. And now that Bo Nix has a year of experience, Malzahn's already said, look, he's one of our leaders, and you're going to see him improve. Nix only had 6 interceptions last season, and he actually enters this season with a school record streak. This is a pretty incredible statistic right here. He enters the season with a school record streak of 191 thrown passes without a pick, which is the second best active streak in the nation. Do you know who he's behind? Trevor Lawrence of Clemson. That's an impressive statistic. Bo Nix right now, second in the country in a streak of passes without a pick, only behind Trevor Lawrence. 191 to 276, which that right there shows you how distanced Trevor Lawrence is from the rest of the field. I mean, we're watching Secretariat, right? The Trevor Lawrence at the Kentucky Derby. I mean, he's 7 horse lengths in front of everybody else. But Bo Nix is a solid second, and I'm not saying Bo Nix is the second best quarterback in the country, but he is going to improve this year, and I think he is going to take the experiences of the games last season that he lost, and he's going to even the games that he won, even the Iron Bowl. He's going to take that, and he's going to use it this season to improve. I think even more impressive than the pass streak without interception is the fact that Auburn reached the 50-point mark 4 times last season. That is tied for second in Auburn history behind the 6 50-point games that, guess who? Cam Newton put on the board during the 2010 National Championship run. If you don't think that this guy is talented, you're living under a rock. I'm sorry, but Bo Nix could be. I mean, you're in categories with Cam Newton. You're in categories with Trevor Lawrence. And he was a freshman. And this is an Auburn team that, you flip that LSU loss of 3 points, you flip that Florida loss, maybe the Georgia game, and all of a sudden, forget that Minnesota loss in the Outback Bowl. Auburn is a team that's competing for the playoff. Okay, this is a team to beat Alabama. This Auburn team is the team to beat in the West. It is not LSU. It is not A&M, and it's not Alabama. It's not Alabama. I know they're favored, but Auburn is the team in the West. I will die on that hill until they prove otherwise. On the Kentucky side, because we do need to actually talk about the Wildcats, their senior quarterback Terry Wilson is back. He missed the last 11 games of last season. He tore a tendon in his right knee against Eastern Michigan, unfortunately, and Kentucky finished 8-5. Not a bad year, especially by Kentucky standards. But 8-5 was really not where they wanted to be, and so they obviously are looking to bounce back a little bit. And Terry Wilson was really a standout player in 2018. He completed 67% of his passes for almost 1,900 yards. He had 11 touchdowns. And Mark Stoops has done a great job at making Kentucky a solid middle-tier SEC team. Now, he obviously had some comments about just how tough their schedule is going to be. I mean, he was quoted with saying, it's hard, brutally hard. I just shake my head in amazement at how difficult and how well prepared that each and every team we play is. That's a challenge. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Kentucky's schedule is rough. Auburn is going to have a 17,500 capacity crowd. I guess you could call it a capacity crowd. At Jordan Hare. Most of that is going to be students, is what I have been told. So, again, it's not going to be the typical Jordan Hare environment, but it still should be a pretty fun game day experience. And again, this is not to say anything bad about Kentucky. They're a talented football team that's really become a solid contender for middle of the pack in the SEC. Especially in the especially in the East. I couldn't remember the name of their division. Especially in the East, but right now, Florida and Georgia take that top spot, and then Kentucky really is kind of out there by themselves because Missouri, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt aren't really close to Kentucky yet in terms of consistency. I know Tennessee is I believe ranked higher than Kentucky right now, but I think Tennessee. Yeah, Tennessee's at 16. We'll see. We'll see about Tennessee. I'm not going to pass judgment. My pick for this game, though, Auburn. I think they're the safe pick here, and I would imagine that this game, while it's probably going to be close at the half, I expect Auburn to win this game by at least 10, maybe 14 points. So, going with the Auburn Tigers for that first matchup. All right, let's move on to the second matchup. You got Florida and Ole Miss. Now, this is the beginning of the Kiffin era in Oxford, and it's kind of a mystery as to what the team's going to look like. We all know how Ole Miss looked last year under Matt Luke, angry Mr. Potato Head. Just no discipline, no consistency, and it really hurt the Rebels. In more than one game, Ole Miss was in contention, and they were competing for a chance to win, and they just let it slip away. I mean, I'm not just talking about the piss and miss last season against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. I'm talking about even the Auburn game last season. There was a couple of games on Ole Miss's schedule that they really should have been able to win. But this game is more about Florida, to be honest with you. Dan Mullen's in his third year now at the helm for the Gators, and they're coming off an 11-2 season. They are hungry to end Georgia's 3-year reign as SEC East champions, and Kyle Trask is a really solid quarterback who I think is going to do more than Felipe Frank was able to do for the Gators in terms of consistency. Obviously, Trask stepped in last season, performed really well, threw for almost 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and his passing efficiency rating was actually the best at Florida since Tim Tebow in 2009. So, this guy is a senior, Kyle Trask is, but I really think Florida is in the East. They are galvanized. They want to see Georgia's 3-year streak on the SEC East title end. And right now, for me, I'm picking Florida and Auburn in the SEC to face off in the SEC championship. I just don't know who else. Who else are you going to pick? I mean, yeah, you could say Georgia, and yeah, you could say Alabama, but they don't have the hunger that the Florida Gators and the Auburn Tigers have. So in this matchup, obviously, I'm going with the Florida Gators. It pains my heart, but I don't think Ole Miss is going to be anywhere close to Florida. This game will be over by halftime. It's going to be rough to watch. Next matchup that we're going to talk about is Kansas State, Oklahoma. Only thing I really have to say about this game is, look, last year Oklahoma was 7-0 and they were 5th in the country. They faced off against Kansas State, who at the time I believe was 4-2, and the Wildcats jumped out to a pretty substantial lead. It was 48-23 in the fourth quarter. Oklahoma did try and mount a comeback, but Kansas State held on and won that game 48-41. Do I think that's going to happen this year? No, but it's still obviously going to be in the back of these players' minds, right? Everybody's going to remember what happened last year. Now, Oklahoma's coming off a great performance against Missouri State. Again, they blanked them. I want to say it's 48-0, as they should have. And Kansas State lost their opening game to Arkansas State. So on paper, this looks like a blowout, and it should be a blowout. But as we saw last year, Kansas State was able to shock a lot of people in the Big 12 and across the country with what they were able to do against number 5 Oklahoma. I'm picking Oklahoma in this game. You should too. But Kansas State has proven in the past they can be kind of sneaky. So you just never know. You never know with the Wildcats. Let's move on to Georgia Southern and Louisiana Lafayette. Interesting little nugget here on Louisiana Lafayette. They've now cracked the top 20. They're at 19th. And they have made history this season by beating a top 25 team on the road for the first time in school history. They did that when they defeated number 23 Iowa State 2 weeks ago. Look, Georgia Southern, though, they're 1-0. Both of these teams have put together some solid performances. They won their opener. Georgia Southern did against Campbell, 27-26. That was a good game. I actually watched part of that game, and Georgia Southern had 33 players sidelined because of COVID reasons, and they were unable to play last week because Florida Atlantic, they had to postpone the game. So Georgia Southern's already had to go through a lot this season. That being said, I think Louisiana is the safe pick in this game, and I'm going to go with the Ragin' Cajuns. Next matchup on the slate, we have Iowa State and TCU. Now, Iowa State, obviously, we mentioned just a moment ago, they lost their opening game against Louisiana Lafayette. This is an interesting matchup because TCU was scheduled to play SMU on September 11th, but obviously that game was postponed. So now, as long as things go according to plan, TCU is going to face off against Iowa State in their season opener. A lot of issues for TCU last season. They finished 5-7. They lost 6 of their last 8 games, and there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. Gary Patterson has even said that he doesn't know who's going to start at quarterback until game time. So there's just so much uncertainty right now surrounding the Horned Frogs that I'm going to go with the Cyclones. I think they bounce back from that disappointing loss against Louisiana Lafayette, and I think the Cyclones will get this one done. Next matchup on the slate, we got Mississippi State and LSU. Now look, LSU lost a lot of talent. They lost a lot of guys. They lost some coaches. But that doesn't mean that Mississippi State's going to be anywhere close to competing with LSU on Saturday. This game is at Tiger Stadium. And LSU is, they're kicking off their title defense season. I mean, they're the defending national champions. We should give them some credit. They lost, everyone, but they're still the defending national champions. And the Mike Leach era now begins in Starkville at Mississippi State. So it's going to be an interesting matchup, I think. It'll be intriguing to see how Leach's coaching style adapts to the SEC. But the fact of the matter is that even sending off 14 players to the NFL last season, LSU is still the far more talented team. And LSU is going to throttle Mississippi State. This game should not be close. I'm going with the Tigers in this matchup. Next one on the slate, we have Army and Cincinnati. Interestingly enough, both these teams are ranked. Army at 22nd, Cincinnati at 14th. This is going to be a good early test for both of these teams. Cincinnati's off to a great start, and expectations are on the rise, which is something I haven't said about the Cincinnati Bearcats in a long time. But listen, Army right now, 2-0, sitting at 22nd. Really two programs that are not usually in any sort of conversation for, top 20 school, but I think both of these teams have a really good opportunity with this game to show the country what they have. Because listen, the slate's going to be a little soft on Saturday. There's still don't have the Big Ten playing, and there's just there's been some cancellation. So if you have the chance to tune in 3:30 ESPN and watch this game, I'd highly encourage you to do so. I really feel like Cincinnati is just has a few more pieces in place than Army. I mean, this is an Army team that looks much better than last year when they finished 5-8, and they have a pretty significant scoring advantage going, so far this season, 79-7 against both of their opponents, Middle Tennessee and Louisiana Monroe. And listen, Army has dominated on the ground with that option attack. They have 779 rushing yards so far this season. However, I really think that that Cincinnati, is starting to put some pieces together. They have lost 15 of their last 16 to ranked opponents. But I really do think that Cincinnati is going to get this one done. It's going to be a close game. I really think this could be, whoever has the ball last, coin flip kind of game. Maybe it comes down to a touchdown or a field goal. An impressive performance for the Bearcats in their win over Austin Peay. I think Cincinnati gets this one done. If you look on the metric for how everybody else is picking this game, right now Cincinnati has about 75%. So 75% of people picking Cincinnati, about 20-25% are picking Army, which is interesting. I really would have expected this to be more of a 50-50. But that being said, I'm going to go with Cincinnati. All right, we got Tennessee and South Carolina next up. This is a game that's probably going to be ugly at times. Interestingly, South Carolina is favored slightly at 53% over Tennessee, even though Tennessee's got that 16 next to their name, although as we've seen in the past with Tennessee, you should ignore that. Now, Tennessee's going to count on experience. They are beginning this season with lots of familiar parts in place, and South Carolina's got to try out a lot of newcomers. So, it's going to be interesting. This game is at South Carolina. It's going to be at Willie B. This is a late game. This is a 7:30 kickoff on SEC Network. And Jeremy Pruitt's team was 8-5 a year ago. I think he's starting to kind of get into, that rhythm of recruiting and building Tennessee up to some semblance of what they used to be. They finished with, a 6-game winning streak last season. So they had 4 straight SEC wins, and the streak began actually last season on October 26th with a 41-21 win over South Carolina. So expectations are high for the Vols. And the Gamecocks they don't have a lot of momentum. Right after this 4-8 season last year, they have a lot of losses on the depth chart, and there's questions on the roster. And, Will Muschamp has already said, we're headed into the unknown. We don't have a lot of depth, and so we need to have a bunch of guys ready to go. So that tells me that South Carolina they're just happy to be on the field, and they don't really know how they're going to go or how they're going to perform and then how things are going to go. Tennessee has more stuff figured out. I think the Vols are the safe pick in this matchup, so I'm going to go with Tennessee. All right, 2 more games left. Both ACC games, ACC matchups here. We got Florida State against Miami. Now, this is a game that obviously is a huge rivalry game. You're looking at a Miami team that's 2-0 and a Florida State team that's 0-1. The Norvell era at Florida State so far has not gone well, and he's not even going to be able to coach because of the positive COVID test that he had, I believe, late last week. Florida State has had some issues with Miami. They are trying to beat him for the first time in 4 years, and Florida State's unranked. They don't have their head coach, and they just don't look like they're in any shape to compete, even in the ACC, which is really incredible to say. But Florida State is got a lot of issues right now, and I was shocked to see how badly they played in their season opening game against Georgia Tech, who beat them 16-13. That was an ugly game for anybody who watched it. That being said, Miami's riding high. Obviously, they have that 12 ranking, and you would anticipate that if Miami keeps winning, because they're Miami, that they're probably going to get a top 10 nod fairly soon. I think if you're Miami and you're looking at the performance of your quarterback King, he's had 469 passing yards this season, 4 touchdowns. You've played some clean ball. And Manny Diaz is starting to put some pieces in place and make some stuff happen. Everything's clicking right now. Especially on offense. Miami was scoring fast and they were scoring often, and so they looked good against Louisville. They looked really good against Louisville. And King has really emerged as a dual threat player. He looked good against UAB in that season opening win, 31-14, and he looked good against Louisville. He had 83 yards running. He had 83 rushing yards and a touchdown against UAB, and he had 325 yards passing and 3 touchdowns against Louisville. So Miami has a dynamic playmaker right now at quarterback. Florida State has a lot of questions going with the Hurricanes. All right, we got the last matchup for this week's College Pick'em, NC State and Virginia Tech. Now, the Wolfpack come into this game 1-0, but they are not favored at all. This one, ESPN's got Virginia Tech at 88% to win this game, and which is really interesting because Virginia Tech is pretty short-handed coming into this game. They were supposed to play. I'm reading here that let's see. So it was scheduled. So they were scheduled to open the season in so September 12th, but they postponed it due to positive COVID test. So now, so this is a postponed game that now 2 weeks later is being played. First matchup between these teams since 2015, actually. And after 2 delays, Virginia Tech finally gets to open their season. I think this game is kind of a redemption for Virginia Tech. This is a team that lost their last 2 games to end 2019. They lost to Virginia, their rival, and then Kentucky in the Belk Bowl. Not to a bad Kentucky team, but still, not a great performance by Virginia Tech to end the season. And their quarterback, Hendon Hooker, who's a junior, he accounted for almost 2,000 yards last year, 18 touchdowns. And he's going to take the lead for the Hokies this season. It's going to be interesting to see how Fuente incorporates Hooker into his scheme and what that looks like. But I think right now Virginia Tech is looking to kind of redeem themselves, and they really I think they've really shown a little bit more consistency than NC State. Now, again, I know NC State has that win against Wake Forest to start off their season 45-42, but that was a game that really could have gone either way. And when you're flipping a coin against Wake Forest, I'm not sure that's a good indicator of a program that can take care of business. So I'm going to go with Virginia Tech in this matchup. So there you have it. Those are the picks for the week 1, not really the first week of the season, but the first week of the College Pick'em League. Again, if you're not already in that and you want to be sure to be on the lookout for the link that we will post. I'll put it up on our Instagram page, and I'll probably tweet it out again, and then it may be up on Facebook. Lots to look forward to this weekend, though. It's going to be a great weekend of college football. I'm glad the SEC is back. Really excited that the Pac-12 and the other conferences in the FBS have announced they're also going to be returning. So a lot to look forward to. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of AFR. Appreciate you tuning in as always. Again, be on the lookout for that link, and I'll see you next time. I'm Jay Smith. This has been After Further Review.